Chapter 23. Matt Starr had little luck in trying to find a place to hole up. The rain and the wind came up faster than he expected, and he was caught out in the open, with no form of cover nearby. The trail had taken him into a low valley that spread out into a dry meadow of sparse grass and weeds. He pulled his slicker tighter around his neck and kept his head bent low, putting the crown and brim of his hat into wind, taking the brunt of the battering storm. The sorrel, stepping into the tremendous force of wind and rain, faltered occasionally, and his gait was reduced to a labored walk. The gallant horse would often toss his head high, its white mane blowing outstretched in the wind. He would snort and whinny shrilly in protest of the violent storm. Starr held firmly to the reins, but let the sorrel have his head as much as possible. Rain dripped down the nape of Matt's neck and slid down his back beneath his shirt. It was icy cold, and soon his shirt was completely soaked through, as was the makeshift bandage on his side. It soon became sodden and started to slip loose, exposing his wound. Matt couldn't tell if the wound was bleeding free again or if it was only rain sliding along his skin. He suspected that the wound was leaking again, for he was feeling weaker and lightheaded. He could feel the fever coming on. He had to get to cover as soon as possible before he fell out of the saddle. There were trees a long way off to the right. If he could just hold on until he got there, he might find some refuge from the storm's onslaught. He pulled tight on the reins and prodded the horse to turn off the trail. The wind caught them catty-corner as they went, but the force had diminished as they veered away from its full wrath. The horse felt the slight reprieve and stepped livelier until he managed to gain a full stride. Cyclone and the Reverend stepped away from the foot of the ladder and into the tunnel. Cyclone held the lantern high in his left hand. His pistol was out, clutched in his right fist, and pushed forward out in front of him. "Henry! Arapaho!" the preacher called out. "Can you hear us?" "Shh," Cyclone shushed. "You want those Jaspers to hear us?" "Oh, I'm sorry," the preacher said in almost a whisper, but still too loud for Cyclone's liking. "I didn't think." "Just you let me do the thinking," Cyclone whispered, demonstrating the only level of sound he would tolerate. "Pick up your step," Cyclone instructed. "Rap and Henry have had time to get a fur piece, and those other Jaspers are probably close to them already." Cyclone stepped forward quickly, a spry gait for a man of his age, the parson thought to himself, as they hustled on through the tunnel for several minutes. Rap and Henry must have gotten farther away than he had expected. No light was in sight far beyond the illumination of their own light and the seemingly endless darkness ahead. "Look!" Butch shouted with sudden surprise. Although he had expected to see light sometime, the anticipation had been so great that the first sight of light up ahead was startling, and it came from much farther away than he had expected. As one, Ace Dugan and Butch Lowry squeezed triggers and flames spat in the darkness, followed by the echoing thunder of their pistols as they fired several times, hoping one or more of their bullets hit home. But in the split-second instance of flashing light from their pistols, they suddenly realized that something was wrong. There had been two moving shadows only a few feet in front of them, and they seemed to slant sideways toward each side of the tunnel. At the first shooting, the Cyclone Kid, far down the tunnel, saw the first muzzle flashes. Instinctively, he pushed Reverend Lynch sideways to the far side wall of the tunnel, while he himself pressed up against the wall on his side and returned fire toward the muzzle flashes. A man yelped in pain and the guns went silent, but there was the sound of scuffling up ahead. Rap and Chief Henry had been just few feet ahead of Butch and Ace when the firing started. The first two bullets whistled between and past them. They both threw themselves toward the ground and rolled up against opposite walls. As muzzle flashes continued, they each catapulted themselves to their feet and dived low under the flames. They each caught a man beneath his knees and drove him to the ground. Cyclone's bullet passed over their heads as they all fell into a tangled heap on the floor. Rap had cried out in pain as a booted foot kicked him in the jaw. Mad as hell, Rap laid into the melee with a vengeance. Fists were flying, and feet were kicking randomly in the darkened huddle. By the time Cyclone and Lynch got there, the light of the lantern bringing the scene into visibility, 2 men lay sprawled on the rock floor. 2 other men were standing and flailing away with their fists. It was Rap and Henry. "Hey," Cyclone shouted. "Stop it right now! Look at what you're doing!" Rap halted in mid-punch. With his left hand, he was holding Chief Henry by the front of his shirt. His right arm was pulled back and cocked to deliver a blow. Henry was shrinking on bent knees. They stared at each other's eyes. Then they both began to laugh. Rap let go of his friend's shirt and dropped his hand. Then he began to smooth out Henry's collar and shirt. "If you ain't the dangdest pair," Cy said, nodding his head back and forth in amazement. Then, turning his attention to the 2 men on the floor. They were both out cold, but other than that, they were not the worse for wear. "Now," Cyclone murmured, "what do we do with these 2? Chapter 24. "That's the gist of it, Grandpa," Kitty said, as she finished telling him the story that Billy Tyreen had related to her while Cyclone and the others had been down in the tunnel. The Tyreen brothers had robbed the Century City Bank, and Sheriff Vestry had caught Billy while Kenny and Jimmy got away. Vestry was more interested in collecting rewards for the boys, as well as retrieving the bank money for himself, than in seeing justice done. At first, Billy had been kept as a tied-up prisoner, but while on the trail of the 2 remaining brothers, Vestry had offered Billy a deal. If Billy would lead them to where his brothers were hiding out, Vestry would let them all go in return for the bank money. Billy believed him, and led him to Snake Gunderson and his hideaway for outlaws, where they had previously made a deal for refuge. "You darn fools," Cyclone said to the 3 boys sitting across the table from him. They were all gathered in the saloon now after the foray in the tunnel. It was a couple of hours past midnight by now. They had dragged the dead bodies behind the bar so they wouldn't have to look at them. Rap, Henry, and the parson were standing behind Cyclone's chair next to Kitty and Jeremy. "You should have known he would kill you all and take the money himself." Cyclone cackled with amusement. "Then he'd turn your bodies in for the reward and get that too. How dumb could you be?" The young outlaws remained sullen and didn't respond. They just looked at each other in resignation. "How dumb do you want them to be, Cy?" Rap said innocently. Cyclone let the remark go, but Kitty and Jeremy each showed a hint of smirk. "Now if I was you boys," Cyclone said, "I'd be darn glad you run into us instead of the law, and if you're smart, you'll leave this robbing business alone. Get honest jobs and stay out of trouble." You mean you're not going to do anything to us?" Billy stammered. "Of course not," Cyclone said. "We gotta be getting out of here, our own selves. Manuel and his men are due here in the morning, and we want to be long gone before that happens. And if you're smart, you'll be gone too." "What about our money?" Kenny spoke up. Distrust was in his eyes. "You're just gonna let us keep it? Just like that?" "I don't give a gold darn what you do with it. But if you hang around until Manuel gets here, he'll take it from you, for sure. He'll probably kill you besides." "So, can we go with you?" Billy asked hopefully. "Sorry, kids," Cyclone said. "We can't do that, but we're not letting you leave before we go. Neither. We'll leave your guns at the stable with your horses. Then you can go when and where you want. It don't matter none to us." "What about us?" Ace Dugan asked. He and Butch were seated at the same table as the Tyreen brothers. "I don't care what you hombres do either, just as long as you don't get in our way or try to come after us. I guess I don't have to tell you what will happen to you if you do." Rap pulled his pistol out of his holster and nudged the barrel of it under Ace's chin, pushed skin tight against his throat. "Guess what it'll be?" Rap gloated with a big grin on his face. I think they both understand, Rap, Cyclone said. Put that hog leg away before you accidentally blow his head off. Ace's eyes were crossed, looking at it and into Rap's face at the same time. He was shaking and sweat beaded on his brow. Rap pulled back the pistol, dropped it into his holster, and stepped back away from the outlaw. Later, he hissed to Ace, "Just you and me." "What about our guns?" Butch asked. "You gonna leave us here unarmed?" Cyclone thought about that for a moment, then said, "No, of course not. We'll drop your guns off down by the livery too when we ride out. We should have a good start before you retrieve them. If you're smart, you won't use them to come after us." "Be stupid," Rap exclaimed, stepping forward again and reaching for his pistol once more. He had a big smile on his face, but his dark eyes were grim. Cyclone waved him back. "Leave it be, Rap," he said. "Aw, gee, Cy," he said like a disappointed child. "I don't never get much fun, no more." To Ace and Butch, Cyclone said, "Like I said, behave yourselves and you'll do fine. But I can't hold this scallywag off forever." Cyclone indicated Rap. "He's a rip snorter once he gets started." Then, to his companions, Cyclone said, "It'll be heading toward dawn in a little while, in another hour or two. We'll try to relax a bit here and then move out. We'll be able to see the trail a mite by then, and we should be long gone before Manuel gets here and finds out that Gunderson's dead." The trees had afforded a little cover from the rain and held back the force of the wind, but with the condition Matt Starr was in, it wasn't enough. He was getting weaker by the minute. His fever was escalating, and he sweated heavily, mixing with the soaking rain. Pain stabbed through him with every step the big sorrel took, jouncing him in the saddle. He held a death grip on the reins and saddle horn. At times, he felt himself swaying and starting to slide from the saddle. He couldn't slide out, he told himself. If he were to fall to the ground, he most certainly would never get up. He had to hang on. He had to find help and refuge somewhere. But where? The rain pounded heavily against the rough wood ceiling of the shack. In several places, rainwater poured through holes and cracks in the worn-out ceiling. Maria had lain awake for an hour or so after putting her 3 young boys and little girl to bed. The beds were placed strategically to be out of reach of the dripping rain. As usual, she was exhausted from a long day's burden of cooking, washing, and caring for her 4 children. She cut wood for the fireplace and did all the other chores that a man should do. While she was still young in years, the hardships of keeping her family well and fed had aged her long before her time. Once upon a time, she had been pretty and youthful. She could have had any man she wanted, but she had chosen unwisely, and now she was wrinkled and haggard. Her man was hardly ever home, and when he was brutal mean to her and the children. He did nothing to help her with chores, nor tend to necessary repairs. He had been home briefly a week ago, and she had been glad to see him leave again. Now, as she lay there listening to the pounding rain and feeling the pain of the recent bruises she had been left with, she tried to will herself to sleep, for she needed it. She needed to renew her strength for another arduous day that would be tomorrow. Finally, she started to drift off. She was just about out when the sound came from outside the shack's door. At first, it sounded like a short knock, then turned to a scratching sound, and then a loud thud against the plank board door. Was he back? She thought to herself. No, it couldn't be. It mustn't be. There it was again. Thud! No, it couldn't be. Her man always burst in on her. Never a knock. She got up, threw on her old ragged robe, and picked up the kerosene lamp from her nightstand. Warily, Shud crossed the room to the door and leaned up against it with her ear almost against the wood. "Who's out there?" she asked, trying to be loud enough to be heard through the door, but not loud enough to disturb her children. She listened intently for a moment. There was no answer. Just another thud. This time it was quieter and less urgent. She asked again, "Who's there?" There was no answer and no thud. Warily, she opened the door a crack and peered through. She saw no one, but there was a big sorrel stallion out front, standing in the rain with an empty saddle. She pulled the door open a little more and was taken by surprise as a heavy weight against the door from the other side pushed it wide open and forcing her to step back. As the door came open, the body of a man fell forward onto the floor of the shack. He rolled over onto his back, face up. Maria gasped and crossed herself in horror. She lifted her lamp higher, and the glow bathed the man in its light. Lightning flashed outside, adding to the illumination. The man was young and had a good face. She had no way of knowing that he was Matt Starr. "We'd best be going now," Cyclone announced as he straightened up from the chair he had been slouching in. He had dozed just a little, but it was enough to renew some energy. "Everybody up," he proclaimed as he pushed his chair back. He was still hunched a bit and was not at full height. Rapp and Henry groaned a bit and slowly lifted themselves out of the chairs they had been dozing in. Kitty had not dozed at all. She still kept seeing in her mind's eye what she had done earlier. She stood up from her chair and nudged Jeremy's good shoulder. He had slept with his face down on his arm, as a pillow, at the table. He stirred. His eyes opened, and he saw his older sister gazing down at him. He smiled and sat up straight. "Think you'll be able to ride?" Kitty asked. "Sure," he said. He sat up straight and yawned. He started to stretch. The pain in his shoulder reminded him that he couldn't do that. The Tyreen boys, Butch and Ace, stirred, but didn't get up. There was no need, but the activity around them was disturbing. Reverend Paul Lynch remained in his chair, while the others were busy donning dusters and checking their pistols. He too had not dozed. He had remained awake, and even though they hadn't talked, Kitty and the parson had exchanged glances throughout the vigil. An unspoken bond had begun to build between them. Cyclone was in the process of adjusting his duster around his broad shoulders when he noticed the parson was not moving from his chair. A grim look of consternation spread across the old man's face. "Parson," Cyclone said, "you'd better get a move on." Lynch sighed and pushed himself to his feet. He squared his shoulders and looked Cyclone straight in the eye. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not going." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Kitty stiffen and stare at him in surprise and disappointment. Lynch stepped up to Cyclone and added, "I've been thinking about it, a lot, while I was sitting here. I think I should stay here and bury the bodies. They were evil men, but even so, they deserve a proper burial." "I wish you had said something earlier," Cyclone said. "We would have helped you. It's a big job to dig 3 graves. Takes time, and we have to be out of here before Manuel arrives." "Don't worry about that. You go on and do what you have to do. Besides, I have 3 strong young men and 2 big strapping miscreants who can help me. Maybe we'll be done and gone before that bandit arrives." "I wish you'd change your mind," Kitty said, drawing close. There was a slight trace of mist in her eyes. "I want you to go with us. It would mean a lot to me." She heard herself almost begging, though she really wasn't. She suddenly felt ashamed. Paul Lynch moved closer to her. His eyes were soft, almost heartfelt. "It would mean a lot to me too, Kitty," he said. "But I can't. I do have to return home. You know." She cut him off, and her eyes darkened with a mixture of regret and anger. "Yes, you have unfinished business back there." She tossed her auburn hair haughtily. "Business I took you away from." Flashes of memory flitted in her mind's eye. Matt Starr wedding another. The Reverend Paul Lynch on the trail with her. Dandy Jim Butler melting away into the past. Kip Dalton lying in the dust with his life's blood draining away. Tom Vestry and Deputy Miller falling before her smoking gun. She turned sharply away from the parson, not wanting to look at him or wanting him to see her. She shouted to her gang. "Come on, let's get out of here." She hurried to the door and opened it. The Wildcats exchanged perplexed glances among themselves, and then, without a word, they followed her out, leaving the parson and the young outlaws behind. Chapter 25. Dawn was just barely breaking. A faint hint of rising sun was just starting to cast a coppery glow above the mountain tops to the east. The sky was beginning to pale into gray with a slight movement of heavy clouds merging together and starting to drift away to the south, leaving patches of empty sky between and promising a clear new day. Rafe Price and Peso Martin crested the ridge above and to the east of Porter City. They halted their mounts and peered into the shadows below. "The mine entrance is right down there," Rafe said. "Can't see a thing," Peso Martin complained. "That's the way it's supposed to be," Rafe said. "The shadows hide it pretty good. You'll see why that's important when we get there." He lifted the reins and gigged his horse forward, slowly, and headed down the hill. Peso followed close behind him. The men in the carved-out cavern just inside the entrance could see the two men approaching, sky-lined by the encroaching dawn behind them. "It's the Sonora Kid," Ace Dugan said to Butch Lowry. They had just loaded the last case of silver bars into the ore wagon. 2 horses had been harnessed as a team to haul it and were facing the entrance to the tunnel. "Who's that he's got with him?" Butch asked, not expecting an answer. Ace wouldn't know any more than he would. "I don't know," Ace answered. "He looks mighty salty. The kid wouldn't be bringing him if he weren't all right." The horses' shod hoofs clip-clopped on the hard rock floor of the cave and echoed against the hard rock walls as Rafe and Peso rode in. Peso whistled in astonishment as he looked around the large room. Lanterns hung on the walls, illuminating the area, revealing the stables, horses, and supplies. "This is some place," Peso remarked. "This is our getaway plan," Rafe said. "There's a tunnel leading from inside the town to here. Nobody knows about it but us. If we ever need to make a fast getaway, this is it." Rafe and Peso rode up to the wagon, reining down their mounts to a halt. Ace and Butch stepped away from the vehicle and strode up to them. "Hiya, kid," Ace said. "Good to see ya, kid," Butch greeted. They were almost in unison. "What's going on here?" Rafe asked. He was obviously bothered by what he saw. "Well," Butch said, not quite knowing how to say it, but busting out all over, just dying to tell. "We had a bit of a problem, but it's going to be all right." "First of all," Ace Dugan cut in, "maybe you ought to tell us who this Jasper is. Before we go blabbing something maybe, we shouldn't." "His name's Peso Martin." Rafe was irritated that he was being asked. "He's all right. Now spill it. What have you got to say? And just what is this little problem that's going to be okay?" As he said it, he saw 3 young men emerging from the tunnel. Each of them were carrying money bags. Rafe's dark eyes grew darker. His brows pulled together in consternation. His jaw was set firm. His face grim. "Who'd they?" he demanded, gruffly. The 3 young outlaws were now stowing the bags in the wagon bed in between the wooden boxes that carried silver bullion. Now, kid," Ace Dugan said. "I'm getting to that. That's part of what I'm trying to tell you. Snake Gunderson's dead, and these fellas was took in by him before it all happened. They was all right, on the lam too. Snake was hiding them out." Okay, Rafe said with irritation. "So how did Snake get dead?" "I was coming to that," Ace said. "It was that damn Wildcat bunch what did it." Peso Martin started at that, but Rafe held him back. "How'd it happen?" "A couple of lawmen came in here looking for these boys. The Wildcats killed them both, and while they was doing it, they shot Snake and Harvey both. It was the little bitch herself what killed Snake," he exaggerated, blaming it on Kitty. It sounded better than saying the rogue lawman did it. "And what did you do about it?" Rafe demanded. "Nothing we could do. Snake had already sent us down into the tunnel to smoke out a pair of them Wildcats that was down in it." "Wait a minute," Rafe scolded. "Why were they in the tunnel? Did you get them?" No, I'm afraid not. Ace started, trying to figure out how to say it. What he means, Butch put in. They kinda got us. What? Rafe shook his shaggy head back and forth. Yeah, they did, Ace admitted. Get on with it. What happened to the Wildcats? Are they still around? No, Butch said. They just rode off. Didn't even care about us. Didn't care about Snake's stash either. He pointed to the ore wagon. We figured we'd just load it up and get out of here before Manuel finds out what happened. He'll want his share of it. Which he'll figure all of it's his share, Ace added. Rafe said nothing, just stared angrily at the two henchmen. Wait a minute, Ace put in. You ain't thinking that we was gonna cut you out of it? We just knew we had to get it out of here fast, Butch explained. We figured on hiding it someplace, and then we was going to look you up and give you your share. Rafe stared at them for several moments. Then he growled between clenched teeth. Sure you were. He leaned forward over his mount's neck to get closer into their faces. The two men trembled, speechless. And what about those three boys? He indicated the young outlaws who were just now going back into the tunnel. Are we, and I mean we, sharing with those three too? Butch came a little closer, keeping his voice down, and said conspiratorially, Of course not. We just told them we would, to help us get loaded and away from here. But we figure on killing them, first chance we get. That's the first smart thing you said since I got here. Rafe straightened in the saddle, and his face relaxed a bit. The old glint was coming back into his eye. Those silver cases look mighty familiar to me, Peso Martin finally said, once Rafe and his two so-called partners finished their heated tirade. Seems to me they belong to Simon Price. I don't know what you're talking about, Martin, but if this is your way of saying you want to cut, say so. Just remember, nothing goes back to Price. If it did, he wouldn't give you anything, but if you take a cut, that's all you get. How much? Peso asked. Ace and Butch were still standing there. Rafe said to them, Go get the others out of the tunnel. We've got enough. Let's get moving and get out of here before Manuel arrives. Who? Me? Both men asked in unison, not sure who was being addressed. Yes, you, Rafe said emphatically. Both of you. Ace and Butch looked warily from each to each. They shrugged, turned, and disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. Your share, Rafe said to Peso. Depends on how many partners we have. Peso smiled, knowingly, and nodded his understanding. A few moments later, Ace and Butch emerged from the tunnel with the three boys. Behind them was a fourth man. He wore a black suit. Snake Gunderson's gun belt encircled the man's lean waist and was tied down against his thigh. The right-hand side skirt of his broadcloth jacket was pushed back behind the handle of the protruding 6 gun that rested in the holster. A preacher's white collar was unbuttoned and hanging loose from where it had encircled his neck before. Rafe smiled when he saw this man saunter toward him. He quickly dismounted and walked toward him. Glad to see you made it, Lonnie, Rafe said as he came close. I was hoping you would find a way to end up here. How'd you get away from the Wildcats? They still thought I was a preacher, Lonnie said. I merely stayed behind while they rode off. They said something about not wanting to be here when this fella, Manuel, got here. By now, Peso Martin had dismounted and came up behind Rafe. Rafe noted the movement and moved out of the way. Peso had a curious look on his face. Lonnie, Rafe said, this is Peso Martin. He works for Simon Price. Then, to Peso, he said, Peso, you know this man as the Reverend Paul Lynch, but he's really Lonnie Shaw, also known as the Blade. He's an expert with a knife. He works fast and quietly. He's the man your boss hired to kill the governor. Peso grinned. Oh, I get it now. He pretends to be a parson at the wedding. Gets close to Stanton, probably in private somewhere. And then I slit his throat, Lonnie Shaw grinned. Didn't count on getting whisked away by a jealous girl and a bunch of crazy old men. Peso bumped Rafe's right elbow to get his attention. As Rafe turned his head, he saw Peso's dark eyes boring down at him. Peso nodded to the side, indicating he wanted to speak privately. "Just a minute, Lonnie," Rafe said. Then Peso and he stepped back a ways. Peso whispered low, "Is this another partner? You get my drift?" "Don't worry," Rafe said. "It's only me and you." He stepped away and approached Lonnie Shaw again. "Think you can still pull the job off?" Rafe asked. "Sure," Lonnie answered. "I'll just go back and start the wedding all over. Same plan, just delayed." "How are you going to do that without a groom?" Rafe asked. "Why did you have to kill him?" "Kill who?" "Matt Starr." "Matt Starr? What are you talking about? You mean he's dead?" Shaw said. "Yeah," Rafe said. "We found his body on the trail. Way back a ways." "Wasn't me," Lonnie said. "Kitty must have done him in," Peso surmised. "She's crazy enough to punch his lights for ditching her for someone else." "No," Shaw said. "We never met up with him. Had to have been someone else." "But who?" Peso said. "Doesn't matter," Rafe answered. "But it does pose a problem for you, Lonnie, to get close to Governor Stanton again. I think I can still make it work as long as no one knows Starr's dead. Obviously, he must have been trailing the Wildcats to bring me back. We can simply be waiting for him to return. For all anybody knows, he may have taken off with the girl and her gang after all. The governor and his daughter may need some consoling. You know what I mean?" Rafe smiled. Said to Peso, "I told you and your boss that my man here is good. Now you see how smart he is." No response came from Martin. He wasn't sure if he wanted Shaw to be smart. "Lonnie," Rafe said, "you'd best get back there as soon as you can and get the job done. My horse is already saddled. Take it and get going before Manuel Gonzalez gets here. There's liable to be big trouble, and I'd as soon you weren't part of it." He turned and walked back to his horse and gathered up the reins. Shaw followed close. As Lonnie took the reins and stepped his left foot into the stirrup, he said lowly, "This man, Peso. What about him?" He gave a furtive glance toward the loaded wagon. "Don't worry, Lonnie, I'll take care of it." Then he added, "Hell, it was his idea to have only 2 partners." Shaw smiled, knowingly. He turned his mount and rode off out through the mine entrance. No partners is better than 2, Rafe thought to himself as he watched Lonnie Shaw ride off and disappear from view. Chapter 26. The morning sun had fully risen over the mountain peaks to the east. The early, cool mist was burning away, and the dew-covered grass was quickly losing its sheen as the moisture began to dry up. The sky above was clearing to a delicate blue texture, bringing the promise of a nice day ahead. Manuel Gonzalez and his men came roaring into the empty street of ghost town Porter City. They swooped in with shrill voices, cheering and shouting with glee. They fired pistols into the air, wantonly, in celebration of another adventure, another success, and more money to be divided up among them. They were the victors, returning home with their spoils of war, having left a trainload of people stranded several miles to the west with what valuables they had been carrying, gone along with the contents of the express car. There were about 20 in all, as they raced their horses into town, reining them down and sliding to a halt in front of the saloon. They were swarthy, unkempt, unshaved, and dangerous-looking men, armed with rifles and sidearms. Ammunition belts crisscrossed their backs and chests. Many carried sabers and scabbards attached to their saddles. Although Manuel had lost several men the day before, to the Wildcat gang, he never seemed to lack for men. There were always willing replacements to draw from. Dust from the already drying street clouded up beneath the horses' hooves as the army pulled up to a halt. Rafe Price, Ace Dugan, and Butch Lowry stepped out onto the broken and cracked remnant of a boardwalk before any of the visitors had a chance to step down from their saddles. The 3 Tyreen brothers had already been taken care of and were lying on the rock-hard floor of the cave with a bullet hole in each of their heads. Peso had hidden himself away until Manuel would leave. Explaining his presence would have been dangerous for all of them. "Hello, Manuel," Rafe greeted them first. "Glad to see you made it back." "Well, well," the bandit general mused aloud. "If it isn't my old friend, the Sonora Kid. Glad to see you too, mi amigo." Then to the two men standing with Rafe Price, the Sonora Kid. "It is also good to see you too, Senor Ace and Senor Butch." Without a break in his speech, he said to Rafe, "Manuel always make it, as you say. Always I come back with more money in my pocket. More money for my men, and I cannot forget, more money for Senor Snake. Can I?" "Manuel," Rafe said, not wanting to put it off any longer than necessary, said, "I'm afraid I've got bad news for you. Snake Gunderson's dead." Manuel jerked his body erect in the saddle with complete surprise. After a moment, he relaxed and his broad, beaming grin returned. "Oh, Senor Kid, that is so bad news. Now Manuel cannot share his good fortune with him." The grin disappeared and his face turned grim. Or is Manuel supposed to share with someone else? He leaned forward in the saddle. There was menace in his tone. "Someone, like, maybe you?" "No. No, Manuel. I'm riding on. What you do here from now on is up to you." Manuel turned his attention to Ace and Butch. Butch got the meaning right off and said nervously, "We're riding on too, aren't we, Ace?" Ace glared at him and started to say something. Butch was nodding his head up and down, telling his friend to agree. The smart thing. Agree. Don't tangle with Manuel. Ace got it. Shook his head no. That's right, we're moving on." Manuel put the smile on again. "So, Senor Ace, can you tell me what happened to Senor Gunderson?" There was no longer his mocking good friend. "The Wildcat gang got him. Got Harvey, too." "And you just let them do that?" "I wasn't here at the time. Ace and Butch were here, but they were caught off guard. They had no chance to stop it." "Snake wasn't worth dying for," Butch put in. Manuel smiled again. "You are not so dumb, after all, Senor Butch. But tell me why they let you live." "They didn't want to kill us. They just wanted Snake's stash. We let them have it. It wasn't worth dying for either." "I am so sorry, Senor Butch. You are as dumb as I thought, after all." Then to Rafe, Manuel said, "You were all going to just ride away. You never thought maybe you would go after the Wildcats and get the money back. Maybe you weren't going to tell your good friend, Manuel?" "We waited for you, didn't we?" Rafe said flatly. Manuel thought it over for a moment, then nodded his head in acquiescence to himself. "You are right," he said. "Now," Manuel continued, "it is not that I don't trust you, Senor Kid, but I must make sure that what you say is true." "I should like to see." He laughed, and his rotund belly rippled. "My good friend's body, pay my respects." He continued to laugh. "Sure, come inside," Rafe said. "The bodies are right where they fell." Before Manuel's arrival, they had dragged Snake's and Harvey's bodies out from behind the bar. The others had been removed and hidden in the cave. No explanations would be needed. Manuel and one of his men went inside. Manuel only glanced at the body of Snake Gunderson just to make sure he was dead. He didn't concern himself with Harvey Coleman. What he was really concerned with was Snake Gunderson's war chest that Manuel knew was hidden in the cellar beneath the trap door. He never knew about the tunnel and the escape route. Having satisfied himself that the money and silver were gone, he and his men hurried out of the saloon and climbed into their saddles. "Do you know which way they went, Kid?" Manuel asked as he settled himself. "North," Rafe said. "I heard them say something about Pop Dawson. That's in Colorado. That's north of here." "I have heard of this Pop Dawson," Manuel said. "He has a hiding place for men like me. Well, maybe not quite like me, but maybe for those like the Cyclone Kid and his gang." Manuel lifted the reins to urge his horse away, but halted briefly. If these wildcats do not have my money when I catch up to them, I'll be back for you." He turned his horse and shouted, "Andole!" He kicked his mount into a gallop and rode out, his small army following, leaving a cloud of dust and an echoing thunder of hooves in their wake. Peso Martin whipped up the team of horses, pulling the loaded ore wagon. Their riding horses had been tied on behind for future use. Rafe Price rode shotgun beside him. He gripped the Winchester tightly in his hands and scoured the countryside around them, ever alert for any trouble that could come their way. They had left the mine entrance just minutes before. Lying next to the bodies of the three Tyreen brothers lie the bodies of Ace Dugan and Butch Lowry. The plan had called for, and had been played, for two partners only. Chapter 27. Kitty had been quiet and sullen all morning. From the time they had left Porter City until they found a good place to hide off the trail and have a mar breakfast, and then, back on the trail again, she had hardly spoken 2 words to anyone. Cyclone rode along beside her to her right. Jeremy was riding to her left. He seemed to be managing all right and was sitting straighter in the saddle. Color was returning to his cheeks. Cyclone waited for Kitty to break the silence, but mile after mile clip-clopped away. Cy knew her heart was breaking from all directions. He hadn't dared to bring up the painful subjects that were bothering his granddaughter right now. Time and time again, he started to say something and then thought better of it. He just didn't know what to say. He kept shifting uneasily in the saddle. They had been on the trail for over an hour after the stop for breakfast. The sun had fully crested the mountains to the east. Coolness of early morning still lingered, but the threat of another hot day was present. Only a few fluffy clouds, high in the blue of the morning sky, drifted lazily above. Finally, Kitty broke the silence and said, "Go ahead, Grandpa. Say what you're thinking." "Just thinking how I know you're hurting. God knows you've been hurt more'n you deserve." "Oh, I deserve it all right, Grandpa. I started this war against Simon Price, and it's caused every wrong thing that has happened. You've told me time and again I was wrong, that I should be a lady settled down with family. Instead, I have driven away good men like Matt Starr and Jim Butler. I watched Kip Dalton die, and now I've left a good man, a man of the cloth, no less, behind, to endure who knows what all. I just hope he had sense enough to get away before those Mexican bandits got there. And now I've taken lives, myself. I should have known that, just by strapping on a gun, it was bound to happen, eventually. Now it has happened, and I don't want to live with that." "You can't change what has happened, Kitty," Cyclone said. "Men like Simon Price and Snake Gunderson spread their evil everywhere. Not just on you, but other people too. How many people hurt by Simon Price have you helped? How about your ma? Look what you've done for her. You've got to focus on the good things and carry on, or it will all have been in vain. I know I've told you many times that this life is not for you. I wish you could have a life like other women. It's really all my fault." Cyclone heaved a sigh. "I went along with you on everything. I never could deny you anything, even though it wasn't good for you. I've told you all along that Rapp and I should have ridden right into town and shot Price down, like the miserable polecat that he is. You kept telling me I was wrong, that it would make me a killer. I'll tell you this, girl. I've killed before, and I didn't like it. It weighs heavy on my soul, and I'll have to account for it someday. But I'll tell you this, everything I've done has been on the side of justice, and that goes for you, too. God knows you paid a high price for justice. And as far as that goes, you have nothing to be ashamed about concerning Matt and Jim. What happened with Kip Dalton was his doing. You did the right thing then, too. I know you have true feelings, even if you sometimes have a little bit too much of them, and you seem to spread them around much too easily." Kitty glanced up at him and forced a little smile at that. "And as far as Reverend Paul Lynch is concerned, I'm sure he'll be able to take care of himself back there. I have to admit, I've never seen a preacher man like him. He's a man with a lot of bark on him. If I didn't know better, I wouldn't take him for a messenger of the Lord." Peso Martin and Rafe Price had barely gotten started and were still in sight of the mine entrance when Peso pulled up on the reins and called, "Whoa!" "What's the matter?" Rafe asked, suddenly suspicious. "Something doesn't feel right," Peso said. "Feels like the right back wheel is dragging. The brake shoe is probably rubbing against it. Jump down and check it out, will you?" Rafe eyed him warily. "Why me? Check it you own self." "We don't have time to argue here," Peso said with annoyance. "Just check it, so we can get going." "All right," Rafe grumbled and jumped to the ground. He hurried around to the rear of the wagon on the driver's side. He squatted to examine the wheel. "Looks all right to me," he said as he straightened and stood up to full height. As he turned to return to the wagon seat, he caught a fleeting glimpse of Peso Martin half-turned on the wagon seat. His pistol was in his hand, and the barrel was aimed point-blank at Rafe Price's chest. Rafe hardly had time to process what was happening and instinctively went for his gun, twisting his body slightly away, when flames stabbed from Peso's gun muzzle, followed by the thunderous roar of the six-gun that echoed repeatedly against the far mountains. Then total silence. Rafe Price had crumpled into the grass. A blotch of red spread across his chest. Peso grinned to himself, put his gun away, and whipped up the team. The plan called for only partner, he thought to himself as he drove away. "Cyclone! Cyclone!" Arapaho Brown shouted as he galloped his big gray forward. He had been riding far back from the others, watching their back trail, keeping a lookout for anyone trailing them. It was a precaution Cyclone had provided for, although he was pretty sure that Manuel and his men would be more interested in acquiring Snake Gunderson's stash than to come after the Wildcats. Arapaho pulled his horse to a sliding almost halt, but reining the big gray down to a walk next to Cyclone. "Dust cloud back there, Cy," he said excited. He was breathing hard, and his words tumbled out in bursts. "Looks like a lot of riders. About how many Manuel usually rides with? They're coming fast." "We thinned them down a bunch yesterday," Cyclone said, fairly calmly. He needed to settle Rap down. He gazed back along the trail. "But I think you're right. He never seems to have trouble getting more men," Kitty put in. "That's right," Cyclone mused. "But if it is Manuel back there, why is he after us instead of grabbing up all of Gunderson's loot?" "Maybe there wasn't any to get by the time they got to Porter City," Jeremy put in. "Maybe those guys we left behind scooted out with it themselves." "I don't know," Cyclone said. "I figured those three young'uns to be too scared and would have pulled out of there as soon as they could. And I didn't figure Ace Dugan and Butch Lowry to have brains enough or gumption enough to try anything. I figured they'd pull out too after the preacher got done with them. But if they did take off with the loot, I would have thought Manuel would have been after them instead of us." "Maybe they took the same trail as us," Kitty said. "Naw." Rap shook his shaggy head. "I'd have seen a smaller dust trail back there first. There's only one, and there's only one bunch. A lot of them. Gotta be Manuel." He added, "While we're sitting here jawing, Cy, they're getting closer. Don't you think we ought to hurry up a bit and get out of here?" "You're right." Cyclone touched his heels to the sides of his big chestnut mare and picked up the speed to a canter so he could still talk as the others kept up with him. Then to Rap, he said, "I sent Henry on ahead to scout out for places we could hole up in to make a stand if we needed to. We haven't seen him since he went over that rise up ahead. He's been gone 5 minutes. I want you to ride on and bring him back. We'll try to catch up." Rap pulled sharply on the reins, breaking away from the other 3 riders. They loosened the tethers, giving the gray his head, and spurring him into a fast gallop. He disappeared over the rise in no time, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Cyclone glanced back over his shoulder and saw the dust cloud behind them. It was close enough now that dark shapes of riders were highlighted by the backdrop. "Let's get going," he shouted, putting the mare to a gallop. Kitty and Jeremy close behind. As they topped the rise ahead, they brought their mounts to a halt. Rap had fully disappeared from sight as they gazed into the valley below. The trail they had been following disappeared into a barren plain of hard-baked clay and rocky debris. Further to the north, they could see the plain dropping down lower and narrowing down to a pass between towering columns of granite spires. Giant boulders were strewn haphazardly across the landscape as if placed there by a giant hand deliberately designing an obstacle course. They only paused here a moment. A brief glance behind told them the riders were closer. The dark shapes took form, and it was clear there were at least 20 riders. Further confirmation that Manuel was in pursuit. They lashed their horses forward and guided them as they half picked their way and half slipped down the incline. Reaching the valley below, they were now out of sight of Manuel and his men. At the same time, they saw 2 riders up ahead threading their way through the rocky terrain. Rap was on his way back with Chief Henry. As the riders met up with each other, Rap was shouting, "Beyond the pass, the trail drops down into a dry wash. There's boulders and rocks high up on the banks. It's good cover." "Good," Cyclone shouted. "We'll make our stand there. You know what to do." He urged his horse forward into a gallop. Jeremy and Kitty raced after him, each wondering what Cyclone had meant by Rap knowing what to do. Rap and Henry held back and angled their horses away from each other. Rap to the left and Henry to the right, heading for opposite sides of the pass and riding high into the rocks. Once under cover, they picketed their horses out of harm's way, took their saddlebags, and carried them to a selected vantage point where they could see the oncoming pursuers. They were close now, close enough to distinguish Manuel himself in the lead. They would be entering the gap in just a matter of minutes. Meanwhile, Cyclone, Kitty, and Jeremy came out the other end of the gap and rode behind the cover of several large boulders on the left bank of the dry wash. As they dismounted, Cyclone lifted his saddlebags from behind the saddle. "What's that for?" Kitty asked as they climbed higher on the bank, loose shale slipping beneath their feet and impeding their progress up the incline. "A little something I took from Snake Gunderson's stash," Cyclone cackled in a half laugh as he dropped down behind a large boulder where he could watch the gaps opening. Kitty and Jeremy dropped down beside him. From the saddlebag, Cyclone pulled out a bundle of dynamite sticks, tied together with heavy twine. "Figured this might come in handy," he said, drawing his knife from his boot and cutting the string. He let the sticks spread out on the ground. From his shirt pocket, he pulled a tin box and opened it, letting some matches spill out for easy access. "Rap and Henry's got some too. All we do now is wait for Manuel and his bunch to come out of the gap." Manuel and his men came thundering over the ridge and negotiated the incline without diminishing their speed as the horses half slid and half stumbled, gouging the sparse grassy earth beneath their hooves and spewing clumps of flying earthen missiles. They roared into the valley below and spurred onward around the rock and boulder obstacles. They had lost sight of their quarry for a few minutes when the Wildcats disappeared over the ridge. And now, as they entered the valley, the Wildcats were nowhere to be seen. The obvious route of their escape had to be through the gap. Lashing and spurring their mounts onward, they rode on, headlong at breakneck speed into the gap, looking neither right nor left and riding on past where Rap and Chief Henry had taken up their vigil. As the last of the riders passed by, Manuel and the front riders were already in the pass. "Happy New Year," Rap shouted to himself, knowing he couldn't be heard above the roar of passing horses and men's excited voices as he lit the fuse to a stick of dynamite. The flames sputtered quickly toward the mass of the dynamite stick. Rising from his concealment behind the large boulder, he stood straight and tall, arching the stick high and flung it into the melee of charging horses and men just ahead of the trailing riders. It blasted just as it landed. The impact sent waves of shock and awe. riders plummeted from their saddles. Horses were blown off their feet, while others reared in fright, pitching riders to the ground. The reverberating thunder was still filling the air when Chief Henry's missile from the other side landed in their midst also. This second blast, so close to the last, only magnified the chaos and destruction. More horses went down, some falling on the men already dazed and lying beneath them. Rapp had his second one ready and hurled it further toward the entrance to the pass. "I'm one damn good pitcher," he thought to himself, recalling the baseball game in St. Louis. Henry's second one had already landed, and both charges went off almost simultaneously, creating even more confusion and destruction inside the confines of the pass. Several riders had already pulled back to see what was happening behind them when the first fusillade of dynamite went off. They were already off balance on their horses, and the horses were already rearing and stamping, trapped behind the riders in front and the ones behind. Before they could react, 2 more flying sticks of dynamite landed inside the pass. This time they did more damage, bringing down horses and men alike. Up ahead, realizing attack from the rear, Manuel, forgetting about his men and thinking only of saving his own hide, he spurred his horse forward toward the opening of the gap. He was almost there when the attack began. As he rode through the opening of the gap, Cyclone, having waited for this moment, touched a match to the fuse of the stick of dynamite in his hand. He deliberately had cut a shorter fuse so the dynamite would go off sooner. He tossed the stick out to land several yards in front of Manuel. It went off as it hit. The blowback from the charge brought Manuel's horse down to his knees. Manuel pitched over the animal's withers, landing and rolling in the dirt. He laid still, prone on his stomach, and hands over his ears, as the thunder continued to ring in his head. As yet, none of Manuel's henchmen had exited the gap. Cyclone stepped out from concealment and slid down the embankment. He held his rifle steady, aimed at the outlaw leader. There was another stick of dynamite in Cyclone's left hand. The fuse was cut long, and the flame was sputtering slowly along it. Kitty and Jeremy came out from their cover and stood back a ways from Cyclone. They had their rifles up and at the ready for any play from Manuel or any of his men that might be coming through the gap. 4 of Manuel's men came staggering out of the gap entrance. Their clothes were ragged and disheveled, and their faces were black from the powder charge. "You men, be careful now," Cyclone warned them. He raised his left hand so they could see the stick and burning fuse. "You want to try anything? We'll all be blown to kingdom come. At least I hope that's where I go. The rest of you hombres just may go somewhere else." He was standing over Manuel's form on the ground. Manuel finally lifted his head, removing his hands from his ears. He twisted enough to see his men behind him. More of them had just emerged from the gap. They saw the situation before them and raised their hands in defeat. "Shoot him, you fools!" he shouted. He saw the defeat and fear in their faces and knew he was on his own now. "Manuel," Cyclone said resolutely, "you've been dogging us time and time again. For what? $20,000 you think we got? Seems to me you've lost a lot of men and animals for something we just ain't got. You saw how Snake slickered us. We just never got it." He was keeping the lie going. Manuel rolled into a sitting position. He stared at the burning fuse. "Please, Senor Kid, could you put that out?" "In good time, Manuel. First, I want to be sure you're getting off our case. You gonna believe me that we ain't got no $20,000? I would have thought you'd been happy inheriting Gunderson's stash of money and silver." "But you have it, senor. That's why we came after you." "We don't have it. We left it right where it was at the foot of the ladder under the trap door. But it wasn't there. I looked." Then, with eyes bulging with terror, "Please, Senor Kid," Manuel wailed. He was still eyeing the burning fuse. "It's almost burned down." Cyclone thought a moment, then he thrust the dynamite stick downward and ground the fuse into the dirt. Manuel breathed a sigh of relief. Then he said, They told me you killed Senor Snake and took his silver and money. Who told you? Ace and Butch? And the Sonora Kid. Who the hell is the Sonora Kid? Cyclone blustered. We see him sometimes when we go to split our loot with Snake. Well, I don't know who is, Cyclone said. But dollars to donuts, him and Butch and Ace or any one or combination of them stole it. They sent you after us while they could make a getaway. Dollars and donuts? No, dollars and silver. Manuel was even more confused. They made a fool out of you, Manuel. Can't you see that? Hell, if we took it, where is it? It would take a wagon and a team of horses to move it. Does it look like we got a wagon? You been following any wagon tracks? Say, you are right. Then, as if another thought occurred, he said, Then I will go back and track them down. I will get my money back. With what? Your men and horses are pretty well done in. Again, you are right. Kitty came forward and said to Manuel, Was there a preacher man there when you were? No, I see nobody like that. Grandpa, Kitty said, we've got to go back there and see if anything has happened to him. Cyclone thought for a while. There was a pleading in her eyes. Once again, he could deny Grandpa's girl nothing. Then he said to Manuel, All right, get what men you can. Better leave some able men here to help with your wounded. I won't have you just abandoning them like usual. We'll go back with you. I'm not saying we'll help you get the money and silver, but if there's trouble, we'll lend a hand. We just want to be sure what happened to a friend of ours. You all right with that? See? Chapter 28. It was well into the middle of the afternoon when the Wildcats and Manuel, with 6 of his men, rode into the outlaw town hideout. The sun was hanging midway toward the mountain horizon, and the clear blue of the western sky was beginning to pale. The riders wasted no time in searching the town and the underground passageways. They had found the dead bodies of the 3 young outlaws, Butch and Ace, and the tracks of a loaded wagon in the cave. The horses Rap and Chief Henry had seen were also gone. There was no sign of any money, silver, or any kind of other loot left behind. They had ridden a short distance from the mouth of the cave when they found 2 of the extra horses that Peso Martin and Lonnie Shaw had let loose. They were grazing idly in a meadow of green grass. A little farther on, still following the wagon tracks of the fleeing 2 outlaws, they found another horse. This one was saddled and bridled and was cropping grass in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. At the base of the tree's trunk, the shape of a man's body sat on the ground, his back leaning up against the bark of the tree, his head bowed with his chin against his chest. The riders rode quickly toward the man. His horse shied away as the new arrivals slid their mounts close. The man didn't seem to stir nor acknowledge their arrival. Kitty was the first to slip from the saddle, even as her pony was still sliding to a halt. She squatted beside the man and saw that he had been shot. His shirt was caked with dried blood to the left of his chest. She tilted the man's chin up and searched his face for signs of life. Cyclone and Jeremy had just dropped on bended knees behind her when she felt a slight movement of the man's head in her hand. Rap and Henry had also dismounted, but remained standing. They were cautioning Manuel and his men to stay in their saddles. That is the Sonora Kid, Manuel stated from his perch. He steal from Manuel, let him die. Without turning, Cyclone said over his shoulder, Rap, he says another word, shoot him. Rap smiled wryly at Manuel. He flourished his gun barrel at the Mexican leader. Go ahead, Greaser, say a word. Manuel shifted uneasily in his saddle. Kitty ran her fingers over the man's stubbled cheeks, and as if they brought life to him, his dark eyes opened a bit. First as slits and then to half open. A slight upward turn of his lips was all he could force as a smile. I must be, he croaked out feebly. Kitty consoled, sliding her hand across. He was burning up with fever. Dreaming, the man finished, forcing it out. Angel, he declared weakly. Can't be heaven, for me. Jeremy, seeing the man still alive, quickly darted to his horse and retrieved his canteen and returned to his sister. Don't talk, Kitty whispered, as she unstoppered the canteen and held it to the man's parched lip. They had already begun to split due to the dryness. She spilled a drop onto his lips first and gradually moistened them until the man was responding enough to give him a swallow. It took several minutes before the man began to come around, but eventually his eyes were wide open and he began to become aware of the people surrounding him. His thirst for more water began to overtake him, and he reached for the canteen eagerly. Kitty held it back and maintained control. She gave him a little more, and then some more. It seemed to give him ease, and then, with the relief, he relaxed and closed his eyes. He drifted back into unconsciousness. The sun was just tipping the top spires of the western horizon when the man awoke. Kitty and the others drew close as the man stirred and opened his eyes. He seemed to be feeling better. He gazed down at his chest. His shirt was gone. He had been washed and his shoulder and chest were expertly bandaged. Who are you? He managed to ask. He moved slightly, then winced as he felt the pain of his wounds. We found you here, shot, Kitty said. You were lucky. The bullet hit under your left breast and traveled upward through the excess flesh. It exited and strafed along your shoulder. You lost a lot of blood, but nothing vital was hit, and the bullet wasn't stopped. Rafe Price suddenly remembered how he had stumbled backward when Peso Martin shot him. That must have accounted for the bullet not hitting him directly. Do you remember what happened to you? Kitty asked. You know who did this to you? If he had the strength to chuckle, he would have. Yeah, I know who did this. He thought about it for a moment, savoring the expectation of revenge. Kitty eyed him closely, waiting and hoping for an explanation. Rafe gazed into her eyes, reading the curiosity that resided there. Then, suddenly, those eyes became familiar to him. Was it because he had seen her face in the fog of delirium when he thought her an angel? No, it was something else. Do I know you? He suddenly asked Kitty. I don't think so, she answered, but the question did prompt her memory, and she did think there was something familiar about him. I'm Kitty Carlin, she said. Do you know who I am? Rafe persisted. I've been told you are the Sonora Kid, she answered. Yes, the Sonora Kid. That's what they call me now, but you don't remember me, do you? Of course not. You were much younger than me. You were just a little girl the last time I saw you. You certainly have changed. He smiled. For the better, I must say. Kitty stared quizzically into his face. The more she stared, the more she seemed to feel some sort of resemblance and recognition. Then suddenly, it came back to her. Raphael? She asked. Raphael Price? Yes, Rafe said. Rafe Price, Sonora Kid. Makes no difference. No good whatever I'm called. You related to Simon? Cyclone asked. His son, Kitty answered for him. Her voice turned hard. Then to Rafe. You into something with your father here? She demanded. My father? Rafe answered scornfully. He's always into something. He has a way of getting everybody in with him. Just what did happen here? Kitty asked. Who shot you? And why? You know the why. Money? Silver? As for who, I'll take care of that. You kill those men back in the cave? Cyclone asked. No, but I'll take care of who did. Same fella that shot you, I suppose, Cyclone muttered. What about the other man? Kitty put in anxiously. The other man? Yes, a man of the cloth. A reverend. Reverend? This time Rafe's chuckle was stronger. Hell, he wasn't a reverend. He's Lonnie Shaw. They call him the Blade. He's a hired assassin. Good with a knife. Assassin? Kitty was stunned. Then he was hired to kill Governor Stanton. Officiating at a wedding was a good way to get close to him. Where? Where is he now? At first, Kitty had felt tears begin to well up inside her at the disappointment. She had been duped again by a smooth, talking, good-looking man. Anger took over and her face hardened. He's gone back to the capital. So the wedding goes on again? Not this time. Not without Matt Starr. Matt Starr? What about Matt Starr? He's dead. It hit Kitty like a sledgehammer. Cyclone jolted, and Jeremy let out a gasp. That's impossible, Kitty protested. Tears were already pouring out of her eyes and streaming down her cheeks. It can't be. It just can't. Forgetting about Rafe's wounds, she grasped each arm and shook him, pounding his back against the trunk of the cottonwood. You killed him, you son of a bitch. Cyclone reached forward, taking her shoulders and pulling her back from Rafe. Settle down, girl, Cyclone said quietly. Let's hear what he's got to say. Rafe cringed backward, pressing hard against the bark. His eyes still had fear and surprise in them, and then they softened as Cyclone held Kitty back. I'm sorry, Kitty, he said. I really am, and I didn't kill him. I didn't even know him. We found him on the trail. He was already dead. We? Who's we? Kitty demanded, as she broke away from her grandfather's grasp. Her eyes pierced Rafe's. That's what I'll be taking care of, Rafe answered. Kitty pursed her lips. Her jaws clenched hard together. She stood and stalked away to her horse. Grasping the pommel and cantle of her saddle, she steadied herself for a moment. She laid her cheek against the saddle and sobbed. Half an hour later, Kitty, Cyclone, Jeremy, Arapaho Brown, and Chief Henry Two Owls were once again in the saddle. Cyclone had already instructed Manuel to take care of the wounded Rafe Price, and that he had better not hear where the Sonora Kid had met an untimely death or injury. With much chagrin, Manuel had agreed to Cyclone's demands. He was also considering how useful Price might be in recovering Snake Gunderson's loot. You don't have to come with me, Kitty said again for the umpteenth time. She had regained her composure and resolve. She had decided what had to be done. Matt Starr would have done whatever was necessary to protect the governor, and now it was up to her to follow through for him. Lonnie Shaw already had several hours head start. It was a 2-day ride back if stopping to camp and sleep the first night out. Kitty was counting on Shaw not knowing there was any need for haste and would stop for sleep. I plan on riding straight through the night. We'll have to pace the horses, but we'll have to keep going. It'll be tough going, and I hate to put the rest of you through it, Kitty said. We all go together, Cyclone said. That's the way it's been, and that's the way it stays. Just don't you go worrying none about us. With a lash of the reins and jabs of spurs, they sent their mounts forward and rode off. Once more, Wildcat Kitty, the Cyclone Kid, and the Wildcat gang were riding for justice again. It had been dark for several hours when Maria heard the clip-clop of a horse's hoofs outside the little cabin. Her heart leaped into her throat. Oh no, she thought. It couldn't be. Her husband could not be returning now. Not while the wounded gringo was still in her cabin. He would kill the gringo, and he would beat her again. She forced herself to the window and pulled the tattered curtain aside, just enough to peek through the bottom corner. She quickly dropped the cloth and fell backward, pushing herself up against the wall for support. Her breathing quickened and her heart pounded. It was her husband. He was back. What would she do now? All she could do was pray. The door burst open and the man's body filled the doorway. Manuel Gonzalez was already in a foul mood. He had lost the trail of the wagon with Snake Gunderson's loot and had to give up for the day. He was still seething over the treatment he had received from the Cyclone Kid earlier. What is going on here? He demanded, seeing Maria cringing against the back wall. Why are you standing like that? What have you done, woman? His dark eyes scanned the shadowed interior of the cabin. His dark, bushy brows pulled together as he gazed through the open drape of the bedroom doorway. He could see someone in the bed, a man. His face pinched up into a snarl, and he growled as he stepped forward and grasped a handful of his wife's hair and dragged her with him as he stepped into the bedroom. He came to an abrupt halt as he recognized the unconscious man in the bed. Manuel Gonzalez let go of his wife's hair and shoved her across the room to land on the floor. A wide grin spread across his swarthy face. "Senor Matt Starr," he chuckled to himself. "This is indeed a fortunate surprise to me, mi amigo. I just might find some use for you." Chapter 29. Governor Hugh Stanton was sitting in his swivel chair behind his huge mahogany desk. He was turned away from it and was staring blankly through the double French doors leading to the garden outside. The view was fading dimly into the shadows of late afternoon and early dusk. The sky beyond was gray and beginning to fill with darkening clouds. Stanton appeared to be deep in thought, but at the moment, his mind was a blank and he was numb to his surroundings. He stirred only slightly as the sound of the latch turning in the oversized door to his office whispered behind him. The middle-aged and short, thin, male secretary from the outer room peeked through the opening. "The Reverend Paul Lynch is here to see you, sir," he announced. He stepped further inside, pulling the door wider open and ushering the man of the cloth inside. Stanton bolted upright in his chair and whirled around to face his visitor. Blood was suddenly rushing to his face, and he felt his body begin to tremble. The secretary was already leaving the room and closing the door behind him, and leaving the Reverend standing there. Stanton jumped up from his chair and darted around the big desk. His hand was thrust forward, and his long legs carried him across the office floor in just a few strides. A broad smile had spread across the governor's face, but it was hardly one of sincere happiness or pleasantry. His apprehension was just too overwhelming. Lynch stepped forward to meet him, but Stanton was already on him before reaching the center of the office. They shook hands quickly. "You got away?" Stanton blustered, almost sounding stupid. He still held the minister's hand and had his left hand clamped against the man's upper arm. "I was lucky," the parson said calmly. His words were almost a whisper. "I managed to slip away and they didn't seem concerned enough to follow me." "The Wildcats, you mean?" Stanton asked as he led the young minister toward his desk. There were 3 plush leather chairs in front of the mahogany desk. He didn't know why he asked it that way. Of course, it was the Wildcats he escaped from. They had kidnapped him, didn't they? "Please sit down, Reverend," Stanton offered, indicating the leather chairs. He hustled around behind his desk and sat in his own chair. "It must have been a harrowing experience for you," he said as he settled himself. "Yes, it was," Lynch said as he shifted in the chair and pulled the tails of his black coat together toward his lap. "But, as always, I had my faith in the Lord to sustain me." "Tell me about your escape," Stanton urged. "Did you manage it by yourself? And did Matt Starr come back with you?" Lonnie Shaw, as the humble preacher, let his eyes show sadness and sighed. "I'm afraid I have bad news for you, sir." He paused to let the governor get ready. He had decided to get the job done quickly and not bother to lead Stanton on about Matt Starr's possible return. Stanton's face went slack. His eyes widened. "I'm afraid Matt Starr is gone, sir." He deliberately wanted to prolong the suspense. "Gone?" Stanton questioned. "You mean—" "Yes, Governor. He's dead." Hugh Stanton bowed his head and propped his forehead up with the palm of his hand, his elbow on the desktop. "Oh my God," he mumbled. Although he had never been fond of Matt Starr, he couldn't help but worry how Barbara was going to take this news. "I'm sorry, sir," Shaw reiterated. He was enjoying this. "How? How did it happen?" Stanton asked once he had recovered enough from the shock to raise his head and turn his attention to the preacher. Was it the Wildcats? He didn't want to believe that, but how else could it have happened? "I'm afraid it was, sir." "Still enjoying it," he added. "It was that girl herself who did it. shot him without a hint of remorse. I can only pray for her soul. Pray for her soul? Stanton roared with anger and catapulted from his chair. He began to pace around the office, trying to release his rage and activity. May the black-hearted bitch burn in hell, he growled. Shaw left his chair and moved up behind the governor. He placed a reassuring hand on Stanton's shoulder. Now, sir, he said calmly. You don't mean that. You're just angry right now. The time was right, Shaw told himself. Stanton was totally off guard, and his back was to Shaw. When you calm down, I'm sure you'll regain your compassion. He was sliding the knife from inside his coat pocket. Stanton's shoulders trembled, and he began to sob. Shaw raised the knife high above the governor's head, ready to plunge the 6-inch blade into Stanton's back. Stanton surprised him by turning toward him too soon. A glimpse of the man behind him with arm raised and a knife blade slicing toward him was just enough to send stark terror through every fiber of his being. The gleaming blade slashed downward, but in that sudden instant, glass broke from behind Shaw and his victim. The double French doors burst open, glass shattering over the thick carpet of the office. A shot was fired, its thundering boom filling the enclosed office with a deafening roar. The knife fell from Shaw's grasp, and blood streamed onto his fingers from the wound in his upper arm. His eyes blazed wide with surprise, pain, and hatred. Stanton was pulling away from the man at the same time that Shaw was half shoving him away. He fell to the carpeted floor. Wildcat Kitty stood just inside the double doors. Her pistol was in her hand, and smoke was still curling up from the barrel. With his left hand, Shaw reached inside his coat, pulled out a revolver, and turned it on Kitty. Kitty pulled the hammer of her weapon to full cock and ready to squeeze off another shot when the room, once again, was filled with gunfire. Smoke filled the room, and as it cleared away, Lonnie Shaw was lying dead on the floor, a bullet between the eyes. Arapaho Brown stepped in through the double doors. He held his gun along his side, the smoking barrel pointed toward the floor. Thanks, Rap, Kitty whispered, still trembling and releasing the hammer of her pistol as he stepped past her to stand over Shaw's body. Anytime, Sugar, Rap said. He hadn't wanted her to have to live with another life on her hands. Beside, he thought and then said it. My pleasure. He grinned. The grin faded fast when the oversized door to the office burst open. Cyclone, Henry, and Jeremy practically stumbled through the doorway. Several armed men in black suits had shoved them forward. They all had guns out and trained on their prisoners. Stanton was just starting to rise to his feet and was on one knee. The larger man of the guards, who seemed to be in charge, bellowed. We caught these men out front, trying to sneak into the Capitol. He took in the scene before him. He saw the dead man on the floor, Rap and Kitty with smoking guns in their hands. Drop those guns, he ordered. Kitty and Rap looked from one to the other, and then at Cyclone. Do what they tells you, Cyclone said. Now, what in hell's been going on in here? The guard continued. That man, on the floor, Stanton offered. He was slightly short of breath. He tried to kill me. These two. He indicated Rap and Kitty. Well, I guess they saved my life. What about these men? The guard asked. They're with these two, Stanton said. Then to Cyclone, he said. That's right, isn't it? You're all together, aren't you? You are the Cyclone Kid, I presume. You dad burn presume right, Cyclone muttered. Stanton nodded his head, then said to the guards, Lock them all up. I'll decide what to do with them later. Seems you're a mite ungrateful there, bub, Cyclone said. In case you haven't noticed, but it seems like my granddaughter has saved your miserable hide twice now. Stanton took a deep breath and begrudgingly growled, I've noticed. Then to his men he ordered, Now get them out of here. As the guards ushered them out, Kitty paused as she passed Stanton. She glanced toward the body on the floor. I may not be there to save you next time. Maybe you'd better check with friend Simon Price and find out just who your real friends are. I suppose, Simon, that you're wondering just why I called you here today, Hugh Stanton said, leaning back in his comfortable chair behind his large desk. It had been a week since the attempt on his life and the capture of the Wildcat gang. Simon Price was comfortable and relaxed in the plush leather chair. He smoked leisurely on the fine Cuban cigar Stanton had offered him. Whatever it is, Hugh, Simon said, blowing a ring of smoke. You know you can count on me. I'm not asking anything of you, Simon. I just wanted to bring you up to date on a few things that I'm sure you'll want to know about. Simon took another drag on the cigar. He didn't seem to anticipate anything of much importance. It's about that girl, the one known as Wildcat Kitty. I know she's given you a lot of trouble in the past. Trouble? Simon scoffed. She's a menace. Well, I thought you'd like to know that she and her gang have been apprehended. Simon practically fell forward out of his chair. He was taking another drag on the cigar and it choked him. He coughed. We have them in custody at Fort McDowell, Stanton continued. We're holding them there until we can take them to trial. Once they're convicted, we can bury them away in Yuma prison forever. They'll be out of your hair. He glanced at Simon's balding head and smirked, for good. He finished. Simon sat back, once again relaxing, and smiled. That is good news, Hugh, and it should be a feather in your cap for capturing the Wildcats during your administration as governor. Possibly, Stanton said, and then changing the conversation. There is something else I want to tell you, Simon. His tone became a little more somber and businesslike. You probably don't know, but another attempt was made on my life. He waited for a response. No, you don't say, Simon said as if he didn't know. Yes, we've decided to take action that we believe may put an end to these attempts. We? Yes, Washington and I. Simon remained silent, waiting for the rest. Stanton watched Price's face closely as he said, We believe someone wants to leave my job vacant with the hopes of succeeding me as territorial governor. Again, he waited for Price's response. After a moment, Price said, Oh, you don't think anyone would kill you, just for your job? He squirmed a little uneasy in the chair. Maybe so, maybe no. But just in case, Washington has agreed to let me choose a successor now. That way there would be nothing to gain by my death. That is, unless there is some other reason we haven't thought of. I'm sure you must be wrong, Hugh, Simon said. Be that as it may, Stanton began. This is the real reason I've called you here today. I have already chosen my successor. Simon was suddenly stunned. At first, he thought he had been found out and he was being accused. But that was just his conscience talking, he told himself when he finally came to a much different conclusion. He smiled and sat back into the cushions. You actually mean that you are choosing me as your successor? He was beaming with pride. Stanton was silent for several seconds. Then he said in a very terse tone, No, Simon, he said bluntly. I would never choose you. Simon's smile faded. The cigar dropped from his mouth and fell onto his lap. He didn't notice it starting to burn a hole in his trousers. Chapter 30. 5 weeks later, an army ambulance wound its way along the twisting trail, climbing high into the mountains. It was late morning on an early December day, and there was a chill in the air, although the sun, in the clear, cloudless blue sky, was shining above the mountain peaks and offered a bright, lustrous day. The ambulance from Fort McDowell had loaded up its passengers before dawn while it was still dark and had left the compound with little notice. Kitty, Cyclone, and the others had been held in the stockade for 6 weeks, and when they were rousted from their sleep in the early morning hours before dawn, they had no idea what was waiting for them that eventful day. They had all been shackled with handcuffs and leg irons. The dread of Yuma prison weighed heavy on their minds. The Army ambulance bounced and tilted back and forth as it rolled on over the rocky trail. They had ridden several hours before they felt the vehicle turn off to the left onto smoother terrain. They must have left the trail, for the roll of the wagon wheels beneath them seemed more labored and quieted by what was probably tall grass. The ambulance finally rolled to a halt. The rear doors of the vehicle opened and the earth sunlight poured in, erasing the dimness of ambulance's interior and causing the passengers to squint until they could adjust to the brightness. Armed cavalry guards stood on both sides of the vehicle, guns out and at the ready while the Wildcats disembarked. Once they were on the ground and able to look around them, they could see that they were in a clearing on a shelf high above the plain below the mountain. The panoramic vista below spread out hundreds of miles. Several yards off to their right, nestled in a crop of pine trees, a squat log cabin sat unobtrusively from casual view of anyone who might be traveling near this way. It was run down from lack of use, and probably no one actually lived there anymore. A slight tendril of dark smoke wafted lazily from the chimney. The guards herded them toward the cabin, and when they reached it, the door was thrown open and they were bidden to enter. Just as the bright sun had affected their eyesight when the ambulance doors had been thrown open, Kitty and her companions had to adjust to the sudden darkness inside the cabin. The guards prodded them forward, and their boots, weighted down by the heavy leg irons, thudded dully across the wooden floor. As the interior gradually came visible, they could see the shape of a large man sitting behind a beat-up wooden table. Flames in the fireplace behind him flickered and hid the man's face in further shadow. "For God's sakes," the voice of the shadowed figure demanded of the guards, "put those guns away and get those shackles and leg irons off these people." Two guards hustled forward, sheathing their pistols, and went to work unlocking the handcuffs and leg irons. The voice was commanding and very familiar to the Wildcats, and as they were freed of leg irons, they shuffled forward until the meager light revealed the face of Governor Hugh Stanton. He was bundled in a dark overcoat and wore a slouch hat pulled low over his brow. "Now leave us alone, sentries," he ordered, and turned his attention to Kitty and the others. "I suppose you are wondering what's going on here today," Stanton said, matter-of-factly. He didn't wait for them to answer. He continued, "What I'm about to do cannot be revealed beyond this meeting. As governor, there are things I have to do and things I am not supposed to do. This is one of those times that I must decide for myself, a course of action, and I alone am responsible and accountable for it." "If you don't mind, Governor," Cyclone spoke up, "how about jumping over this political speech-making and get to the point?" "All right, I'll get to it. I have reason to believe Matt Starr is still alive." Kitty gasped. Her knees turned to rubber and bent beneath her. Cyclone grasped her shoulders and steadied her. Tears were already streaming down her cheeks. "I know this must come as a shock to you all, just as it was to me." "What makes you think so?" Cyclone asked. Stanton hesitated a bit, then said, "I've heard that he's been seen down around the border. It's been reported that he has turned renegade." "Matt Starr?" Cyclone blustered. "That's crazy. That boy eats the flag for breakfast and drinks red, white, and blue milk. He's disgustingly honest." "I agree with you," Stanton said, "but his picture has been printed in several newspapers. He's been seen riding with a Mexican gang. They've pulled several robberies, banks, trains, coaches." "That'd be Manuel," Cyclone muttered. "Who?" "Manuel Gonzalez. We've crossed his trail a time or two." "That's what I thought," Stanton replied. "So maybe you'd know where he is." "If you think we know anything about that, you are quite mistaken." Kitty spoke up defiantly. She had regained her composure, although her heart was pounding like a hammer on an anvil. "I know that," Stanton retorted, "but I want you to find him." "In case you forgot, bub," Cyclone said, "you got us in jail. How would you like to get out?" Stanton smiled slightly. "I can arrange that, you know." "So arrange it," Kitty said. It's not so easy, Stanton said. As you know, Matt Starr was supposed to marry my daughter, Barbara. Kitty took a deep breath. She didn't like the reminder. A hint of anger still lingered inside her. I never approved of my daughter's choice of Matt Starr, Stanton continued. But, for some reason, she wanted him. I could never deny my daughter anything, so I went along with it. Now, I have not told her of the possibility that he's alive, nor that he may have turned outlaw. If there is any way that Matt Starr can be found alive and innocent of these allegations against him, I want him brought back to her. And you'll turn us loose if we do that, Kitty asked contemptuously. So your daughter can marry Matt? I think I can understand how you feel, Miss Carlin. It had been a long time since Kitty had been called that. I need to tell you that I had to promise Matt Starr that on his wedding day with Barbara, I would issue an order of amnesty for all of you. He glanced at Jeremy, Chief, Rap, Kitty, and Cyclone. Kitty's heart leaped to her throat. Matt would do that? For her? Did he still care, after all? I am willing to honor that commitment here today, but no one is to know, Stanton continued. My tenure as territorial governor would be greatly compromised. What's this fancy talk all about, Cy? Rap put in. He had remained silent with Henry and Jeremy much too long. I think he's saying he's going to let us go if we find Matt Starr and bring him back. Not quite, Stanton said. I'm saying that I am giving you amnesty and offering you all a job. He tossed a handful of metal objects on the table. There was an inscription on each one. Those look like lawman badges, Rap said. What's that they say on them? Deputy Territorial Marshal, Cyclone read. He looked quizzically at Stanton. You'll need some authority down along the border. What do you say? Do we have a deal? Cyclone looked to Kitty. She looked back, then to the others. There was a moment of silence, a moment of consideration, and then, as one, 5 hands reached across the table and grasped a tin star. 2 days later, fully supplied and equipped, the Wildcat gang rode south in the name of the law, adding to the growing myth and the legend of Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid.